Good morning, everyone. The last time I had to prepare a talk like this was September 2001. You all remember after 9/11, and it was not an easy talk to prepare or to give, and this also was a little bit of a challenge. Of course, circumstances are quite different today, but still, there's that same feeling of fear and anxiety and despair and hopelessness. And on top of that, we have this unusual situation where we're all isolated, separated from each other. Uh, we have this fear that people may end up in the hospital, they may even pass away, we won't be with them. We won't be able to have proper funerals for them. We won't be able to say goodbye, have proper closing, and even go through the mourning stage, which is so important. We all know, and perhaps some of you who are watching this have personal experience with this. And if that's the case, then of course we all offer our condolences. So this is an unusual case. It's not like there haven't been uh, tragedies with worse numbers in the past. Just out of curiosity, I decided to check about earthquakes. There was an earthquake in 1556 in China that killed 830 people. This was mostly, probably all at once, instantaneously. And then we can think of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust. We can think of uh, genocides in different parts of Africa, the war that's been going on all these years in Syria, the fear that they have, people being bombed all of the time. There are many horrible situations, but this is something unique. The numbers don't tell the whole story. Not knowing who is carrying the virus, not knowing if we get it, if there'll be a room in the hospital, if there'll be a respirator for us, who will be allowed, if there are a certain number to have them, who won't be allowed. Now they have these formulas for who should be permitted to get a respirator based on age and state of health and all sorts of different things. So it is really a situation that we can hardly imagine. Then there's the economic component. There will be people who lose their jobs, who lose their insurance, who lose their homes, who will end up homeless on the street. So it's really a very frightening type of situation. Now, what do we do when we find ourselves in a situation like this? The first thing we generally do is to ask ourselves, why did this happen? A very natural type of question. Is there any rhyme or reason to it? Some people go so far as to say, where is God in all of this? Why didn't he prevent this? If God is all good, we have all these types of questions that come. Second question is a little bit more reasonable and a little easier to deal with. And that is, how do we cope with all of this? How do we keep our sanity? How do we keep our faith in God? How do we maintain our peace of mind? So I want to try to answer both of these. The first I won't really answer because I don't think there's a very good answer, but I want to go through these to attempt to answer these questions. And I want to take the special help of the Holy Mother. We'll see through her teachings and through her life how she really helps us to deal with these problems, because her life was also not such an easy life. It was filled with different types of difficulties from beginning to end. Now, the why. The why is always a question that I don't like, because there's so many assumptions behind it, and there are so few answers to it. We can always deal with the how. How did this virus start? Our science is very good. In certain cases, we can go back to even the first person who had it and the first person who transmitted it to somebody else. But the why, first of all, can we even ask that question? There's a kind of unspoken assumption there that there is some type of divine plan, that nothing will happen outside of the parameters of this plan, or there's a personal God who's making decisions, who's responsible for these things, and therefore there's some divine purpose or some divine good behind everything that happens. This was a philosophy that was very popular in the Enlightenment period in Europe. This is the best of all possible worlds. This was a great statement that was made by a philosopher named Leibniz. And then we have our French novelist Voltaire. He wrote a whole novel called Candide, uh, just satirizing this idea that is this really the best of all possible worlds? And yet, there is some inherent belief that everything happens according to the will of God. There's a hidden purpose behind all of these things, and that ultimately it will result in something positive. Now, the second conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the first. We know that there can be things that maybe we consider random events, but something positive comes out of it. And we see so many positive things are coming out of this, so much selflessness and heroism and people coming together. So good can definitely come out of bad. That doesn't mean that this was the plan for it. Anyhow, so this is something that we see that many people will have a firm faith in this idea. Nothing happens unless it's the will of God. Sri Ramakrishna himself, we will see him repeating something like this many, many times. He had a favorite song, a song of Ram Prasad. Many of you, of course, know this. Shokli Tomari Icha Mai Tare Tumi. That, oh, Mother, everything is done according to your will, according to your sweet will. People think that we're doing something, we're not doing it, that everything is your will. Then Sri Ramakrishna liked to quote the Sikh devotees who came to him, and they often would say that not a leaf falls that is not due to the will of God. And Sri Ramakrishna liked this. He would also say that yeah, that this is true. That he had a firm conviction regarding this. Now, what does it mean, though? The one thing about Vedanta is that nothing is very simple. So, what does it even mean to say that everything that happens is done by the will of God? Does it God, or is there some being who is actually deciding what direction the leaf will fall? Will it go to the right, to the left? How fast will it go? Will the wind blow it up? Is this exactly what we mean by that? Is there a puppeteer who's really directing everything? Maybe on some level that this is a way we can understand it. If that's true, does it mean that all of our effort is so much self delusion? This is also something, there may be some truth to it. These are very difficult questions. But I find that when we see Sri Ramakrishna making a statement like this, that we can't take it, first of all, out of context, and we can't take it alone. We have to look at all of the other types of statements that he made with regard to, do we have any free will, or is it all God's will? I want to relate a discussion that Sri Ramakrishna had with one of his devotees, Ishan Mukhopadhyay. Ishan was uh, questioning Sri Ramakrishna. He was saying that this householder stage of life is praised so much in the scriptures. Why did you renounce the world? So Sri Ramakrishna, generally he would give, a very simple type of answer. Oh, well, what do I know? I do as mother makes me do. I speak as she makes me speak. This and that. And then Ishan, well, he wouldn't back off. And then he said that, what if everybody renounced the world? And then he said, it would be against the will of God. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he said, why should everyone renounce? Then he got a little sharp. Sri Ramakrishna could do that. Sometimes, especially the Ishan was someone who was greatly devoted to him. He wasn't a stranger to him, and a very wonderful person. So it got a little sharp. So Sri Ramakrishna said to him, on the other hand, can it be the will of God that all should revel in lust and gold, like dogs and jackals in the mating season? Has he no other wish? Do you know what accords with his wish and what is against it? You say that God wants you to lead a worldly life, but why don't you see it as God's will when your wife and children die? Why don't you see his will in poverty when you haven't a morsel to eat? Maya won't allow us to know the will of God. So when we say, or Ram Prasad in his song, it's Ramakrishna, Mother, everything is happens according to your will. Who can say that? Who can go around doing all sorts of things and saying, "Oh, this is the divine will"? Only those who are perfectly God-realized souls, whose ego has been perfectly transformed. We can say that Ramakrishna himself was one of the very few perfectly suited to be able to say that. The rest of us, we make a mockery of it. If we go around doing whatever we want to do and say, "Oh, it's a mother's will," then what sense does it make? We can do all sorts of nonsense. And the history of religion is filled with people who have done horrible things, claiming it to be the will of God. So we're left with this dilemma. Everything is the will of God on some level. We can accept that. Uh, and the other thing is, when we hear Sri Ramakrishna saying this, we have to understand that he saw God alone dwelling in all beings. He didn't even see individual beings, and he saw everything as the manifestation of the divine. So his case was completely different. So we're left with this dilemma. We can say everything is the will of God on some level, but it doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want and claim it is God's will. We might even conclude, this is going to sound like a very, very bizarre conclusion, but we might even conclude it is God's will that not everyone acts in accordance with God's will. Hmm. So if Sri Ramakrishna is saying that, Ishan, what do you think you're acting in accordance with God's will? Maybe it's God's will that not everyone acts in accordance with God's will. It's a bizarre sounding conclusion, but it's another way of stating what Sri Ramakrishna himself says, that it is not the will of the Divine Mother that all attain illumination and liberation. She's very happy to let her children play outside and completely forgetful of her. And she says, fine, until they call for her, then she'll come. Otherwise, she'll let them go about. So it may be the will of the Divine Mother that not everyone is free from this veil of Maya. Thakur would give the illustration of this game where someone plays the role of the granny. She stands in the middle, and all the little kids, they blindfold themselves and they grope around. Whoever can touch her gets to take off the blindfold and is out of the game. So Sri Ramakrishna says it's not the will of the granny that everyone will touch her, and then the game's over. She wants to see the game go on. And we can also say that perhaps it's not the will of the Divine Mother that this world should be only good without any evil. We sometimes wonder, is it even possible? Will we understand good if there's not evil? So this is a rather puzzling type of idea that somehow it's part of the will of the Lord that we don't know the will of God, that we do things that are not helpful to us, that we uh, go around in circles. We have a very famous verse that we find in the 18th chapter of Gita, 1861. This was a verse that Swami Vivekananda himself liked very much. Is Ishvara sarvabhutanam hriddasya arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantara rudhani mayaya. God dwells within the hearts of all beings. This is something we can easily understand. God dwells within the heart of all beings. He's that light of consciousness within. Then we get this very strange concept, Brahmayam. Brahm means to wander. So this means making us wander about. It also means to be in a state of delusion or error. So God is making us wander around foolishly, deluded, not knowing where we're going, as if mounted on a machine. So we get this image that so we're on a merry-go-round and we're riding on the horse, and we think that if we keep going further and further, we'll make some progress. We're going in circles. So strange concept, a very strange concept, and yet at the same time, uh, seems to be the nature of things. So what is the explanation? Maya, by Maya. So does this mean due to this divine play of the Divine Mother? Does it mean due to the ignorance of the individual soul? Somehow I think it means both. Now, Sri Ramakrishna will further explain things or perhaps complicate things when he says that this feeling that we have is that we have our own free will, that we're responsible for our actions, is not simply our own ignorance, but this is the will of the Divine Mother, that she herself has kept this feeling of individual will so that we'll take responsibility for our actions, that will strive to make progress in spiritual life and ultimately to realize God. So we have this strange situation that uh, everything may be God's will, but we have to act as if it's our own will so we can have that ultimate type of realization. Now, this is fine for us. Well, what about natural catastrophes? What about these earthquakes and tsunamis and floods and drought where thousands and even millions of people die? Or this pandemic, this is a kind of an in between case that there's a natural cause, but it may be started by the behavior of people. We don't, at least I don't, want to call these man made catastrophes, these horrible wars, all of these things, the result of God's will. We don't like to think that there is a God who will not only allow these things, but it will be the will of God that these things happen. At the most, we might want to say this is the way of the world, this is the plan of the world, this is the way it works. And from that point of view, that this is the will of God, that the world is such that things will take their own course, that people will make their own mistakes. We can look at it that way. Or then we have our theory of karma, which is to say that uh, things will happen according to the law of cause and effect. But we can also say this is the will of God, that everything will be done according to our karma. Now, all of these things can be very helpful. They can lead to some type of very bizarre conclusions. Also, there will be people who will say, "Why do we have this terrible pandemic? Because of the sins that we've uh, committed and the horrible things we've done." There'll be religious fanatics who will blame it on abortion and homosexuality and all sorts of other horrible things based on whatever prejudice and bias they have. So these can also be dangerous things. It's a very complicated situation. So the other way of looking at it is God is directing everything, but not in the way that we understand it, from a much higher point of view. And this is something that only in the eyes of a very highly realized soul, because we hear some of these or very senior swamis saying, "Yes, now I see everything's just as it should be." I don't understand that, but I understand their sincerity, and they can have a higher type of vision. To me, I think a better explanation is what Narendra Swami Vivekananda said to Sri Ramakrishna, that the plan of this world is devilish. I want to be perfectly honest, rather than a divine plan, a very devilish plan. He said that I could have created a better world. This, of course, was after Swamiji's father had died, and they were in deep poverty. There was not enough food for the family to eat and everything, so he was naturally in that type of mood. Then, and we're getting a little closer to something that I understand, that we can look at Sri Ramakrishna's great statement that we're trying to understand these things with a mind that is not capable. That it's like trying to take a gallon of milk and pouring it into a 1 quart container. It simply can't hold it. Impossible for the human mind to be able to answer these types of questions. Okay, now, if I have succeeded in complicating things that were already complicated and muddling a very muddled state of affairs, where even these tragic types of events, when we're faced with them, we have no way of really understanding the why of them, then it's partly by design. Because really the main topic that I wanted to get to is that, and this is where Holy Mother comes to the rescue, that sometimes we have to understand that we don't understand, and we have to pay more attention to how do we deal with all of these things. So here, Holy Mother comes to the rescue. What is her reply when the children are faced with this type of pain and suffering and dilemmas and everything? Her reply is, remember, you have a mother, that I'm there for you. Take shelter with me. I'll always be there to comfort you. No abstruse philosophy or metaphysics or explanations. Sometimes we know a hug is better than an explanation, and really, this is what Holy Mother was trying to tell us. Now, I want to go back to that verse from the Gita, which is really a very disheartening thing. We're just going around in circles, thinking that we know what we're doing and where we're going. We have to look at the verse that follows that. Tameva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bhavat. Tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. There's a solution. What is the solution? Take refuge in the Lord. And here I'm going to change it to Divine Mother. Take refuge in the Divine Mother alone with all your heart. Through her grace, you will reach the supreme abode of eternal peace. So, this is exactly what the Holy Mother was saying, that we have to go beyond the cerebral type of explanation and face these things on a more emotional type of level. I wanted to mention a very wonderful incident that took place in the life of a Holy Mother. There was an elderly woman, a very poor woman. She made her living by carrying bundles on her head for wealthy people. And she came to Holy, she was a devotee of Holy Mother. Holy Mother was very fond of her. She came to Holy Mother one day looking very sad. So Holy Mother asked her that what happened. And she said that recently a son of hers had died. Now, there are other people around, and they thought Holy Mother would say, "Oh, my child, this is the way of the world. We have our karmas," to give some type of explanation to try to console her. None of this happened. And we have a very nice account of this. At this, the mother said, "What sad news, my dear." Immediately, the mother's eyes became wet. After receiving sympathy from the mother, the elderly lady cried out loudly. The mother sat in her veranda, pressed her head on a pole, and also began to cry loudly. Listening to their cries, other women of the household rushed there and watched this pathetic scene silently. Thus, some time passed. Later, when their emotion cooled down, the mother softly asked her woman attendant, to bring some coconut oil. The mother poured that oil on the woman's dry and disheveled hair and rubbed it with her own hand. The mother also tied puffed rice and gur in one corner of her cloth, and while bidding farewell, she said with her tearful eyes, "Please come again, my sweet child." Observing the face of that woman, I realized how much consolation she had derived from the mother's compassionate behavior. This also reminds me of a nice incident in the life of Swami Swahanandaji. Swami Swahanandaji, he uh, found himself transferred to the New Delhi center. He was there to be put in charge, to be the head of the center. And in those days, there was a lot of contact with a lot of very important people. Nehru himself used to come and consult with Swami Swaminathan very often, and there were other important government people who came. And Swami Swaminathan knew that one in particular, and there would be others also, had just lost a son. I think it was in war, probably the Chinese Indian War at that time. Anyhow, so Swami Swaminathan uh, consulted Swami Sharadeshananji, Gopesh Maharaj. Gopesh Maharaj was a disciple and attendant of Holy Mother and was very, very well known to him. He came from the same part of the country as Swami Swananji in Sylhet and was a good friend of Swami Swananji's father. So he always consulted him on things. So he wrote to him, "If anyone comes to me grieving for the loss of a loved one, how can I provide consolation for them?" And Gopesh Maharaj wrote back, "Not much consolation can be given by mere words. You have been leading a life of meditation and dispassion and have obtained a certain degree of peace and contentment. Try to see if a bit of that can be made to enter unconsciously into the heart of the grieving person." And we saw this was Swami Swananji's way, that and the way of a Holy Mother, just to share in the grief of someone else, to show that sympathy is very often much better than trying to give any type of explanation for why and how these things happen. There's a very beautiful Bengali song, and I found that it's attributed to two different people, actually three. The third I didn't know. One is Kamalakanta, a very famous writer next to Ram Prasad, probably the most well-known writer of songs to the Divine Mother, and the other was Nazrul Islam. He was Muslim, but also a great devotee of Mother Kali. He wrote very many beautiful songs, also to Sri Ramakrishna. I want to recite just the first verse of the song. Amoshad na metilo, ashena purilo, sokli puraiye jaima. Joname shod daki goma tore, kole tule nite aima. Sokli puraye jaima, amoshad na metilo, ashena purilo, Sokli puraye jaima. The longing of my heart has not been satisfied. My desires have not been fulfilled. Everything is slowly disappearing before me. Mother, I call upon you to relieve me of this debt of my life. Come, Mother, and lift me on your lap. This is such a beautiful line. This Kole tule nite aima. Please come, Mother, and lift me up, take me upon your lap. This was what Holy Mother, this was Holy Mother's promise to us. During her lifetime, we see so many cases where this was literally true. And now she's gone beyond our vision, and it's equally true. Either we can understand it in her form as the Divine Mother of the universe dwelling within the heart, or Holy Mother still in some subtle form, still available to us in a way that we don't really understand. So this is a very wonderful way of understanding the role of the divine. We may question, is there any sense in praying for the removal of suffering, especially at a time like this? Of course, we'll pray for it, but we don't know if it'll serve any purpose other than to make us feel better, of course. But if this is just part of the fabric of life, then what do we pray for? We pray for this consolation. We pray for this peace. We pray for this strength. There's a beautiful poem which unfortunately has been commercialized to the point where people don't really, I think, look at the meaning of it anymore. This poem called Footsteps in the Sand. You can go to any gift shop and you'll see posters and cards and things with this on it, but it's a very beautiful poem. It was written by somebody named Mary Stevenson in 1936. She was only 14 years old. There are different versions, but I'll read one of these. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were two sets of footprints. Other times there was only one. During the lowest times of my life, I could see only one set of footprints. So I said, Lord, you promised me that you would walk with me always. Why, when I have needed you most, would you leave me? The Lord replied, My precious child, I love you and would never leave you. The times when you have seen only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. Now, the point that I want to make is that this wasn't the time when the Lord removed the obstacles. This is the time when the Lord provided support. So we may not be able to pray and have confidence that through our prayers everything will be perfect. No, it won't happen. But uh, Divine Mother can lift our burden. She can carry us along when we need her the most. Because otherwise, we have our karma. Life won't be pain free. We know this. Everyone will be faced with something. Now we're faced with something it's so radical. But even otherwise, in everyone's life, we have these things that we have to deal with. So we have this idea that the Divine Mother is the Antaryaman. She's the indwelling presence. Now, Vedanta, we have one way of understanding this, that light of consciousness, the higher self. But for the devotee, the Antaryaman is the inner guide, the inner controller. She is the one who will tell us what's right and what's wrong. That's that conscience that we have. The source of consolation, the source of strength, the source of peace. And because of this Ananda aspect of, of the Brahman, then she's the source of love, compassion, and fellow feeling. Now, another way that Holy Mother comes to our rescue is that we can observe in her life how she dealt with these things. So we have her teaching how she helps others, but how did she deal with these problems in her own life? She was very fond of making the statement that the greatest virtue in life is forbearance. She would say that the greatest treasure in life is contentment. The greatest virtue in life is forbearance, because through forbearance, that leads us directly to a contentment. Now, her life itself was filled with sorrow on so many levels. Sri Ramakrishna used to compare her to Sita, who suffered her whole lifetime. It sounds strange because Holy Mother herself would say that I was filled with bliss when I lived in Dakshineshwar, as if there was a pitcher full of bliss in my heart at all times. But if we look at her life from an external point of view, it was a very austere type of life. She would get up at 3 in the morning when it was pitch black out, because where she lived, there was just in the Nahabat. The only place she could go to bathe would be the Ganges. She wouldn't. She was so shy. She wouldn't go whenever anyone else was there. One morning she went. There was even a crocodile, alligator, crocodile, one of them, in the water. Uh, and then the whole day she would be stuck in her room, except when everyone else took lunch. Sometimes she would go out. Uh, that was the only time she could go up and dry her hair the whole day. When to use the bathroom? There was no bathroom, anything like that. Whole day she would have to practice this type of control. So uh, she lived in a tiny room. Sometimes she shared it with one or two others. Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about her as a bird in a cage. Sometimes his niece, Lakshmi Didi, would stay there. And Sri Ramakrishna would sometimes, if some nice sweets came or something, she'd say to one of the boys, take these to the birds living in the cage. And M himself had no idea that Holy Mother was there. That's how much she kept herself out of the picture. And he thought really that there was a bird cage there with a bird in it, that they were being told to give food there. It was really for Holy Mother and Lakshmi Didi. So they lived in this tiny room. Wasn't really a room. They did all of the cooking there. They had to keep all the vegetables and other provisions there and everything. And she only got to see Sri Ramakrishna very often, especially when many devotees came, when she could carry food to him. And other times, she would look, because it was close enough to his room, she would look through the bamboo slits and the curtain that was there, so she could look inside and see what was taking place. She could see Sri Ramakrishna that way. And Thakur knew this, so he would very often say, open the door to the northern veranda, because he knew then she could look in and she could see. She spent so many hours standing like that she developed rheumatism, had problems with her knees throughout her life. But this wasn't the type of mental anguish. This was just some physical difficulty. The mental anguish came, of course, with the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna, who was not simply her husband, of course, but her guru, her guide, her chosen ideal. She looked upon him as Mother Kali. See, after Thakur died, she said, Mother Kali, why have you deserted me? And we have to remember she was only 33 years old. She had lived only half of her life. The rest, another 33 plus years, she had to live without him. Then uh, she had promised Ramakrishna after he died that she would live in Kamarpur. This was a kind of a tradition that now she belonged to his family. She suffered greatly there. No one cared for her there. There was no one to look after her. She had hardly any food to eat. She had there's a torn clothes that she would wear. She had to stitch herself. Then everyone criticized her. They made fun of her. She didn't dress exactly like a widow. She had a small red border. She kept her bangles on. So it was a very, very difficult period. Then afterwards, when she moved to Jaidambati, she had her horrible brothers to deal with. She had these four brothers that were greedy, constantly arguing. Her one brother, the youngest brother, who was the only decent one it seemed, died very young. So she was distraught over that also. But because of that, his wife became mad, and she had just given birth to a daughter, Radhu. So her whole life, Holy Mother had to look after the mad aunt and the daughter Radhu and two other nieces, and all of these burdens in the midst of her spiritual ministry also. And so many devotees came. Sri Ramakrishna was a little particular about he would accept. His disciples, Holy Mother would accept anyone and practically anyone and everyone. Whoever sincerely called on her, she accepted. That meant that she would have to take on some of that karma also. And they saw sometimes after giving initiation or sometimes after devotees touching her feet, pouring Ganges water over and over again because there was a terrible burning sensation in her feet because of that. So, what was her solution? Forbearance, titiksha. And what exactly was her concept of it? Those of you who have been following the gospel class, I mentioned that M not only recorded all of the conversations of Sri Ramakrishna, but designated some as special teachings. He did the same thing with Holy Mother. Not that he recorded all of her conversations, but he came up with a list of 5 special teachings of Holy Mother, and I want to read one of them. I'll read in the Bengali because it's very stark, very strong. She says, Deho dharon korle dukho koshto ache. Deho dharon korle dukho koshto achei. বিধাতার ও ক্ষমতা নেই রোধ করবার তবে শান্তি চাইলে সাধন ভজন করো দেহ ধারণ করলে if one assumes a human body that means everybody so she's talking about each and every person we all have a human body anybody who takes human birth then she says dukkha koshto ache there will be suffering there will be difficulties there will be pain that there's ache that there's no way to get out of it Vidhata is we can say personal God. God Himself does not have the power to stop this. Now remember that when we're thinking that oh why does God allow these things, she's saying the Lord Himself does not have the power to prevent this from happening. She said if one assumes a human body, he will have to experience pain and misery. Even the Lord Himself is incapable of preventing it. Then she says, but if you want peace, then practice spiritual disciplines and perform worship and the like. So, whenever we ask, why does God allow this? Then Holy Mother is saying He can't prevent it. That this is the way of the world, whether it's karma, whether it's the plan, whether it's just swabhava. Swabhava stu paratade. We have this line in Gita that this is just the way things are. We want to know why, and there's not a good why answer. So we're left with no choice, but whether we understand the why of it or not, but to learn how to deal with it. So for Holy Mother, the answer, as I said, is forbearance, which she thought was the most important attribute we can have to bear things patiently, without anger, without fear, without anxiety, without complaint, to develop such strength of mind that nothing can knock us off our feet. Now, I'm going to give an example that's going to sound very odd, but it just came to my mind the other day. In 1974, there was a heavyweight boxing bout with that was called the Rumble in the Jungle between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. George Foreman was a young, strong man, 24. He was undefeated. He was the world champion. Muhammad Ali, this was his comeback. He wasn't allowed to fight for several years. He was older and he was expected to lose. Now, he came up with a technique which he called rope-a-dope. And no one knew that what he was doing when the fight started. He allowed Foreman to push him against the ropes, and Foreman just pummeled him, just hit him over and over and over again. And Ali didn't really try to prevent it, but he protected himself. And later he said that the blows that he received were absorbed by the rope that he was leaning against. So this went on for 8 rounds. People thought that maybe he'll get killed even. He wasn't trying to defend himself. He was absorbing all of these different blows. And what happened in the eighth round was that George Foreman was completely exhausted. And Ali hadn't thrown any punches, so he was fresh that way, and he knocked him out and he won the fight. So a very, very unusual type of thing. But this is Titiksha, that we have this support so that we can bear all of these blows. And this is one way to be victorious, not by trying to change everything and fighting back and doing all of that. Sometimes we have to accept things. And through that acceptance, we end up being victorious that way. Now, there's a very important footnote with this. We shouldn't think that this idea of just accepting pain and suffering, whether it's mental or physical, uh, applies to everyone. It doesn't mean that we should uh, turn a blind eye to people who are suffering. It doesn't mean we don't try to alleviate their suffering, to fight injustice, to fight poverty, to fight exploitation, all of these things. This is something we have to do. We have to do for our own sake, for our own sense of humanity, and also to try to help others. I'm talking about cases where it applies to us, and there's some inevitability about it. If we can change it, we can change it simply. That's okay. We don't want to be so strict that we won't see a doctor, we won't take a pill, all of that. But if it's something that is seems to be inevitable, then we have to learn how to put up with these things, practice forbearance. Now, how do we do this? I want to mention three different methods because we have different types of spiritual practices. One is for the jnani, one is for the karma yogi, and the other is for the bhakta, for the devotee. There's a verse which I like very much from the Brihad Aranjaka Upanishad, and I was very happy to find out that when Swami Bhuteshananji Maharaj was asked what his favorite verse was, he said this verse, a very nice verse. It says, Atmanam chet vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha kimichan kasya kamaya shariram anusamjvaret. Very beautiful verse. Advanam chet vijaniyat. This can be taken in two ways. If one were to know the real nature of the self, or if one wants to know it, if one would like to know it. So that's all of us. Either we've realized it or we're trying to know it. In what sense? I am I am that. If one really wants to know the nature of the self, or if one has a conviction of it, hasn't realized it, or if one has realized it, then kimichan kasya kamaya. Then with what hope, with what desire, for what possible reason would one suffer along with the suffering of the body? Anusam jwarit, dwara. The body may have fever, I don't have fever. I am the witness. This is the way that the jnani will practice this type of, of forbearance. I am the ever blissful self. I'll be the witness of all the changes of the body, mind, and the senses. Let the body suffer. I won't suffer. I'll remain this ever blissful self. So tell the mind that, oh, my mind, you remain in bliss. Let the pain of the body stay with the body. You remain in bliss. Karma yogi, he also has his own method. Very simply, he can say that this is inevitable. There's some karma behind it, that I can try as much as I want to change it, but I myself am the cause. Swamiji had this beautiful poem, no one else to blame but me, no one but me to blame. So this gives us a great sense of peace that we don't blame God, we don't blame other people, we don't blame our bad luck, anything like that, that we simply learn to accept this. I remember a wonderful conversation I had with Swami Swahanandaji one day. After coming to Washington, the first maybe 10 years or so, I used to go back to Southern California every winter. I would go for a couple of weeks and spend some time with him and spend time in Trabuco Canyon. And we were walking together, just the two of us, one day. He was in very poor health, not very close to the end of his life, but not in very good health. He had had different attendants at different times to look after him. For some reason, there was no one there at that time. Either they'd been transferred to another center or in India, something like that. There was nobody there. So I said to him that uh, Maharaj, it is very sad that at this stage of your life, when you need more help than you ever did before, that there's no one to look after you, no one to be your attendant. And he looked at me, I'll never forget, very simply and without the slightest bit of agitation or anything. He simply said, "It's my karma. What can I do?" That's all. And I could see what tremendous peace of mind it gave him. Now, did he believe it literally? Did he feel that he had done terrible things in his life, so he should suffer now? I don't think so. To me, it was more like, this is my fate. This is what lies, the hand that life has dealt me. Why should I pretend it's different? Why should I fight against it? This is just the way that he is. So this is the way that the karma yogi, or someone who has great faith in this theory of karma, this is a great consolation to be able to say that this is my karma. I won't blame anybody. I won't question why it happened. Why did God allow this to happen? This is my karma, and I'll put up with it. It won't last forever. That this too shall pass. Life will go on. That I can manage. That strength of mind is really the essence of this forbearance. Then we have the devotee. This we've already seen. Devotee can say, all right, this is mother's will. Whatever mother wants to happen will happen. And Sri Ramakrishna gave the wonderful teaching example of the kitten. The kitten will say, not only is it mother's will, but it's in my best interest. So when the cat takes the kitten and puts it in the ashes in the fireplace, the kitten is very happy and said, "Mother put me here. It must be the best place for me." If it's on the master's bed, the kitten will say the very same thing. So this is the attitude of the devotee. I don't need to understand why or how, but whatever happens to me, mother won't allow it to happen unless it's somehow in my best interest. Now, the funny thing is that this is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If we really believe that, then it'll turn into something positive for us. Whether it was really the will of the Divine Mother or not, we can't say. So these are all very beautiful attitudes to take. We see the difference between this explanation and what we were looking at the very beginning, trying to find a real answer to why things happen. If we conclude that we don't really know the why of it, we can also say, but I can still take an attitude. The difference between an attitude is we don't bother. Can it be objectively verified or not? Is there some scientific proof that what I'm saying is true? It doesn't matter to us because it also doesn't mean that it's not true. It could be, these could all be true on some level. Karma theory can be true, divine will can be true, but beyond our ability to really fully understand these things. But we see how we can benefit from any of these spiritual attitudes, that these are what we rely on if we want to practice forbearance. And I like all of these, and I find that we can use them and rely on them at different times, depending on different circumstances, and with, again, without bothering whether what's true objectively and what's not true, because nothing in this world of Maya can be proven in any scientific sense. We can have our theories and everything, but each of these attitudes is of great value to us. Each can be a great help in facing daily problems in life. And then when we come up with a situation as we have today, when we really have to draw on some deep inner type of faith and strength, then we find that these attitudes are really a great source of strength and peace for us. So I pray, and we all pray, that the Divine Mother may remove all of the suffering for everyone, even though we know it's not a realistic prayer. It doesn't matter. This is a heartfelt prayer. It means that we would really love to see that happen if it could possibly happen. But at the very least, we pray that we all have strength, that we all have some deeper insight, that we all have the ability to take refuge with Mother, and that we can all get past this very difficult situation. So, really, I very sincerely pray that none of us have to suffer, especially personally, with this virus, this pandemic that's going on. So let me end with the chant. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kashchid Dukkha Bhag Bhave. May all beings be happy. May all be free from disease. May all realize the highest good. May no one suffer from misery. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.